Like coal under pressure becomes a diamond. We became who we are, who you see under the pressure of growing up, when we did, where we did, surrounded by the ignorant people who lived there with us. So really what that did was kind of created a crucible where they had two choices, right? Like when you're under pressure, you can either fold and collapse, or you can become something really hard and determined to get through this. So that's kind of what they ended up doing. And they do that together, right? Because alone, they weren't really doing that well. But when they find each other, they become this kind of stronger thing. And together, they manage to fight through the oppression, the hatred, praying over them, all of that stuff, because they use that to make them stronger and more determined rather than letting it crush them or make them something that they weren't.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Author Spotlight brought to you by Apex Media Global. I am so excited because for the first time we have a returning guest. He just recently launched his book He, which follows the story of its protagonist, Oren Strange, who comes out of his repressive hometown and goes into a pursuit of self-acceptance and enduring love. Larry Benjamin, it's so good to have you back.
Thanks. I'm so excited to be
Welcome.
back with you again. Thanks. I'm so excited to talk about the book in depth. It's the first interview I'm doing about the book. So, yeah, I'm glad it's you.
It's an honor. Well, I did read the book, and I don't want to spoil too much about the characters and their arcs, but I do want to talk about and the narrative behind the story, at least for the first question. So the
Yep.
book begins with two contrasting epigraphs, one from Fallout Boy and then another one from Michel de Montaigne. I'm not gonna butcher the pronunciation, so I'm gonna say the translated. Um, it is because it was he, because it was I. Um, how does this quote encapsulate the relationships and the themes in the book?
Sure. So, actually, I want to start with the Fallout Boy quote because they kind of tie
Yeah,
together. So,
yeah.
the Fallout Boy quote: every lover carries a little dagger in their hand." What that really speaks to is the fact that when you fall in love, your beloved has the ability to hurt you, but we still have that person anyway, right? You have the ability to hurt them because they love you, have the ability to hurt you. So it's kind of a trust factor. The same thing with family, your parents, right? When you come out as gay, they can either stab you with a dagger or accept you, right? So that kind of becomes sets the stage for what happens to them, right?
Yeah.
The other, because it was you, because it was he. When Owen first starts to understand his attraction to men, he thinks it's just because Rio is Rio, and because he doesn't know what this is, right? He's kind of in love with this guy, and he doesn't know anybody who's in love with the guy, and so he's thinking that there's something special about them, which draws them to each other. And then he begins to realize it's something more diffused, and that it's really his orientation that he's thinking about. And not Oren, I'm sorry, Jackson really
Jackson.
personifies that. He becomes this really special person, right? So you've got Oren and you've got Jackson, two kids who have never been loved, who don't really fit anywhere, and they see something in each other that fills something else in the other, but it's only because they've each been through that journey, right? So because
Uh-huh.
because Oren's life was so similar to Jackson's, they each begin to realize they can only love each other because they are so similar.
Yeah. Um, this is a very fascinating conversation for me. I want to kind of address what you mentioned in the beginning about hurt. Like when you love someone, you get hurt. And I wanted to ask you, up to what point do you tolerate the hurt? Like up to what point is it healthy that you can say like it is out of love? And at what point do you choose yourself?
That's a good point. That's a good question, actually, and I think sometimes we have to draw that barrier, right? Like these are my barriers. Like you can't keep hurting for no reason. I
Yeah.
think the reason they survived is because the reason he got hurt was buried in something very, very integral to who he was as a man, right? It was kind
Hmm.
of he stood up for his beliefs and all those kinds of things. So in that instance, it made it easy to forgive him. But I think if somebody's hurting you just because they're selfish, then that becomes the time to really think about, are they really adding value to your life?
Right.
Right. So for me, it's always about, I know a lot of people talk a lot about how, and this has come up with the book with a few reviewers, this whole idea of infidelity or cheating is like the hill to die on, right? Without
Hmm.
really kind of understanding what drove this action, right? And then the question always for me has been, I read this in Anne Landers once when I was a kid. If somebody's cheating on you, the question you ask is my life better with them or without them? And once you answer that question, the next step is how do we move forward? Can we move forward? Yeah, I think hurt is a part of life, right? That's the whole every lover carries a little dagger in his hand.
Right.
For example, when you look at when Oren and Jackson essentially break up,
Mm,
Claude sits down with Oren and says that we are not going to abandon Jackson. We're not happy with what happened and what he did, but he's part of us. This is unconditional love. So when you think about it, that lover dagger thing is really anybody who loves you and you love. So they really could have hurt Jackson by pulling away from him, but they opted
mm.
instead to keep loving him, to become kind of a surrogate grandmother to his kid and stuff. And so that's really kind of what you look at when you think about what does love really mean. And because you have the power to hurt someone, should you use that power?
Right. Hmm. I have so many questions because like it's not as black and white as it seems, right? Like I just
Right.
like last time that I talked to you, I just have so many questions, but um I want to keep it in the context of Oren and Jackson and even Rio, which we'll get to in a minute. But I also wanted to address what you said about like, oh, you love someone because you kind of have that shared lived experience. And I also wanted to ask you, maybe it may be like connected to Oren or Jackson or just like in life in general. How do you recognize that perhaps you're projecting your ideals onto a person and you think that, oh, we have shared experience, I love that person, or is it just like a projection? I'm not sure if I'm making sense.
You do, and I think when we're younger, at least for me, when you're young, you tend to project that and see that person in the most idealized light. But I
Uh-huh.
think, for example, like I met my husband late, we were like in our late 30s. And one
Hmm.
of the things that has kept us together for 28 years is number one, we're both creative. So he's an interior designer and I'm a writer, right? So we're both creative. So we have that creative energy and we get that each of us needs to create space in our lives to do that work, but we were also on parallel tracks, right? So he had a dream of where he wanted his life to go, and my life was kind of tracking with that. But when you come down to it, I'm way more ambitious than he is, and I'm willing to work a little harder than he does. But we still work together because we're both moving in that same direction. So being able to really see him and kind of what his strengths are, what his flaws are, and how we work together is what really kind of brought us together and really actually kept us together.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It does, like rowing in the same direction. So would you be opposed to the saying that opposites attract?
No, I believe that's true. I think you can be opposites on a certain level, and I think at our core we're very similar. But like people look at us and they're like,
Mm,
"Why are you two together?" Because I'm kind of outgoing and friendly and exuberant, and he's just really very shy and kind of just closed. So people look
right,
at us and they're like, "How does that work?" But when you get to spend time with us, you see that we kind of fill the holes in each other. So that
yeah,
opposites attract thing is really just kind of filling in the holes and the gaps in each other. So I push him to
right.
do things he wouldn't necessarily do, and he provides my stability. I think I said to him once, and this actually appears in the book, but Stanley is both my anchor and my wings. Right, so he keeps me
Hmm.
grounded, but he also lets me like fly when I need to fly.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, I guess it's just really not black and white. I don't, at least right now, I don't think that there could be a perfect analogy for that. It's just, yeah. Well, speaking of the book, I do want to talk about the timelines that you've chosen. First, book one, Oren's youth, and then it jumps like 30 years after Oren's like adult life. So, what made you decide to separate it into these segments, and why you chose to kind of reveal that part of Oren?
Oh my God, I'm actually so glad you asked that question.
Okay.
Nobody else has asked me that question before, right? So that really came out of F. Scott Fitzgerald, as you know, is my favorite writer. Like he's kind of my inspiration. And at some point, he said there are no second acts in American lives. Right, and I've always become intrigued with that because typically an American play has three acts: first, second, and third. And he's saying there's no second act in American lives, right? So I first experimented with this in my last book, Excellent Sons, where it's a love story in three acts, but Act Two is really an erotic retelling of Pinocchio. It ties Act One and Act Three together, but there really is no Act Two. So that's kind of where I first kind of experimented with like picking up Act One and then picking up years later with Act Three.
Right.
So I really wanted to like focus in on that. So we have book one when we leave them in book one where they're on the precipice of adulthood, right?
Mm,
And then book two picks up 30 years later when they're adults and kind of what his life is. And so
mhm,
what I really wanted to do there was, first of all, in the first book, or in the book in itself, as you may have noticed, it's not chapters, it's periods, and they're all denoted by color. So the first half of the book, the colors in the periods spell out the rainbow. And that's really because that's about their self-discovery, their kind of coming out process. All of that is in book one. And then the colors become a little harder and darker in book two.
mhm,
The other part of that was that I wanted to take them to the precipice of adulthood. And then 30 years later, you meet them again as if they were classmates you lost touch with. And then you
mm,
pick up, and you get to know them again. You get to not only see where they are, but you kind of flash back to where they were. The other piece of that was I really wanted this book to really focus on those big emotional moments and
mm,
everything within that missing 30 years. Great things happened, but there was not anything that really showed you more about the characters or really drove the story forward.
mhm. Interesting. Um, if you were to kind of do that in your own life, what would be your book one or what would be your book two? Which periods of your life?
Book one for me would be kind of my college years, right up until before I met Stanley. And then book two would be
Oh,
Stanley after that.
oh, that's beautiful. Um, so back to Oren, right? I mentioned in the intro that he grew up in a repressive town, Locust Hollow, and there were quite like bit of challenges, relentless judgment. But surprisingly, this was the environment where he had his like self-awakening. So how did this like stifling, oppressive atmosphere in that town, led by Oren's grandfather and Reverend Jack, serve as a catalyst for Oren and Jackson to claim their like true identities?
So I think for that, I'm going to, before I actually dive into that answer, I'm going to read a quote from the book that kind of addresses that.
Yes,
Just before.
please.
Oh, here we go. Like coal under pressure becomes a diamond, we became who we are, who you see under the pressure of growing up, when we did, where we did, surrounded by the ignorant people who lived there with us. So really what that did was kind of created a crucible where they had two choices, right? Like when you're under pressure, you can either fold and collapse, or you
Mm-hmm.
can become something really hard and determined to get through this. So that's kind of what they ended up doing. And they do that together, right? Because alone, they weren't really doing that well. But when they find each other, they become this kind of stronger thing. And together, they manage to fight through the oppression, the hatred, the praying over them, all of that stuff, because they use that to make them stronger and more determined rather than letting it crush them or make them something that they weren't. And that's
Mm-hmm.
basically what we talked about in the last time I was here was resilience, right? What is
Mm-hmm.
resilience really like? Do you let somebody break you, or do you find a way to kind of keep going?
Mm-hmm. Um, Forgive me if I ask like these kind of like gray area questions, right? But it's really fascinating to me because, for example, you mentioned that pressure like builds character, diamonds, but sometimes also when you give up, that could be the strong thing. At what point do you think that, oh, maybe I should give up or maybe I should persevere?
I'm not really a person who gives up. like,
Mm,
I think that's just my personality, right? I think some people give
yeah,
up. I think sometimes there are some battles that are worth fighting and some that aren't.
exactly.
When it comes to who I am and who I love and kind of what I want to be, there's not really anything that can stop that, or stop, at
Mm-hmm.
least stop the work to get there.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah, and I guess that's resilience in itself. Um, yeah. Uh, Now I'm excited to talk about Rio as well, the handsome high school Rio. So he was a it boy, right? And he served as a catalyst for Oren, saying like who I am and what I want. So Rio and Jackson. What made Jackson the right fit? And how did their love, which Oren described as like preordained and inheriting one's identity, which is beautiful. Um, so after the stability and grace, Oren like just really sought and was desperate for.
So I think Rio is this kind of ideal, right? But Rio was also out of his reach, right? And then he kind of had that affair with the oh my god, did I forget my character's name? With the during picking season, right? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So he has an affair with him. It's this kind of it was intense and it was wonderful, but it was also very hidden. And part of
Hmm.
him really did not want that, right? So you had this one person who he could have in secret, and then he had Rio, who was just a dream, right? And then out of nowhere, Jackson comes and says, "Hey, I like you," right? And Jackson actually wants to bring him out into the light, right? He's very
Hmm.
upfront about, "I like you," and the way I'm supposed to like girls, and I want to date you, right? So they go out on a picnic for their first date, and that was everything to Oren, right? Because now there's somebody who is just like him, who's not afraid, and who doesn't want to keep him hidden.
Mm, yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong. Were you thinking about Juan? Like the transactional
Yes, thank you.
relationship? Right,
Yes.
right. Okay. Oh, thank God I remember. Yeah, Juan.
Wow.
Okay, we'll talk about Juan in a minute, but
Okay.
I want to talk more about Oren and Jackson because
Hmm.
their story is central to the book. I mean, it was
Right.
like nearly 4 decades. And Oren really believed that Jackson is his ultimate hero. But in your view, what explains the depth of their connection?
I think again, they were born of the same environment, right?
Mm,
And they both kind of wanted the same thing. And they were both starved for love and they never really had a home that was safe. I think at some point Oren mentions that until Jackson, it was the first time he'd been touched outside of violence. Right. So that's really powerful when you think about somebody who can bring that sort of thing to you. Um, Jackson just being willing to fight his father, like that scene where he has to break up the concrete in front of the church as punishment for spending time with Aaron. He tells Aaron it's totally worth it to spend time with you, right? I'll do whatever it costs me to spend time with you. And I think that in a way makes Jackson Aaron's hero. But by the
mm,
same token, when things get really bad and Jackson's at a really low point where they're about to be sent off to conversion camp, it's Aaron who steps up and rescues him, right? So you've got these two guys who each see each other as the hero when it's not clear who really is the hero, right?
yeah, and that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Um, okay, let's talk about Juan and Rio. So Oren really, at least like in my perspective, he struggled against labels that were imposed on him and just struggled with what is actually normal. And I mean, his exploration began with Rio, the crush that he had on Rio, and then followed by the intimacy, the transactional intimacy that he had with Juan. But how did this contrast of like Rio and Juan, the visceral experience that he had with Juan, um, gave Oren the knowledge that allowed him to embrace his truth?
I think, right, with Rio, like his feelings and what he wanted from him was kind of theoretical. With
Mm,
Juan, it was actually kind of expressed and it was physical and visceral, right? And I think that's the difference between kind of fantasy and the actual reality, right? So thinking about what he wanted, how he wanted to be with Rio, and then actually being that way with Juan really kind of clarified for him that not only was
mm,
this possible, yeah, this really is what I want and this is possible, but I want something more, right? I kind of want to get married. I want to like hold hands and probably want to do all of these things. But Juan
mhm,
actually really solidified for him that what he wanted was possible and what he wanted was real. Right? This is a kid who didn't know anything about he'd never seen a gay person. So a lot of it
mm,
was theoretical, like what do you do together? Like what does that feel like? All of those kinds of things. And everything he imagined with Rio, like touching Rio, kissing Rio, he did with Juan.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. I love how the story unfolded. But I mean, if people haven't read the book, if our viewers haven't read the book, they would think like, oh my God, poor Oren. But Oren did have his support system. He had his friends like MJ and allies like Claude and Octavio, who became essentially like Oren's chosen family. how did you as an author kind of think about like the tribe, the chosen tribe, where Oren can call them their safety and family?
So I think, and this is true for a lot of gay people, right? Like you sometimes your family doesn't actually support you, right? Or you just are abandoned by them or whatever. And we all need that kind of love in that family. We need a tribe, right? And often we talk about tribe meaning like if you're gay, it's other gay people. But in the instance, tribe is just like a tribe, right? The tribe is not always just relatives, but it's friends, it's people you meet along the way. So for me, our tribe has always been my biological family, and our chosen family. And we were fortunate enough that my family and Stanley's family, to a certain extent, were really supportive, so we could bring them all together. Right. So we got chosen family, and even like our chosen family who didn't have family of their own, my parents very much filled the role of Claude and Octavio for them. So it was always wonderful for me to see them kind of embrace like our friends who didn't have parents, if you will. So I think that's really kind of what happens in the book. They come from this horrible upbringing where there's like they have no one literally but each other. And then even when not Jackson, Oren first meets MJ, he's a little leery about why is this person being nice to me? Why are they trying to befriend me? Like, because this is foreign to him. And then through her, he meets other people. And then when he meets her parents, and they're like, "Oh, you're part of our family now." They're like, "What is this?" They go over for dinner on Sunday nights. They play games with them, and it's something they never had. But to me, it was kind of really important to show that when you think about telling our gay kids it gets better, it really does get better. And for Oren and Jackson, who started off so horribly, that's kind of how it gets better. And it shows that they're worthy of unconditional love, of people supporting them, that they had value and they were loved.
Yeah, I do want to talk about that because I feel like a lot of people would relate to when you've gone through a lot of trauma and kind of just hurt. When you meet people who are genuine and who would want to love you, you kind of like get scared, probably self-sabotage or draw back or don't know what to trust or like what do they need from me? Like why do they love me? How do you just as a person kind of get over that, but also trust yourself to trust other people? Yeah.
And I think that's a great question. And I think in the book, there's a lot of gray, right? That's just kind of the way I wrote the book because that's the way life is to me. But I think, excuse me, when Aaron and Jackson get together and they have this kind of really great relationship, it's not until they're threatened as a couple that Owen really understands that he loves this person, right? Because again, he was still kind of leery and not sure of what was going to happen here. Like, I'm going off to college, what happens to us? It wasn't until he realized that he could and wanted to save Jackson, keep Jackson in his life, that he realized what love was and that he was willing to let it
Mm,
in, right? So by the time he met MJ, he was kind of poised to start letting people in. And as she
mm,
introduced him to people, her family, their classmates, he began to kind of relax and let them in. If you notice, Jackson's friends are all Arwen's friends because
mm.
Jackson is still less trusting and less willing to open his heart to other people's love because he still, I think, doesn't believe he's worthy of it. He thinks Jackson is special. Jackson, not Jackson. Owen is special and sees something in him that nobody else can see.
Um, are you familiar with the concept of trauma bonding? At what point do you
Yes.
think that it's like trauma bonding? Like you're just bonding over your shared trauma. And at what point do you think that there's love that transcends all of it?
So I think really that trauma bonding, if it existed, it kind of
Mm.
evaporated once they moved to University City and
Mm-hmm.
got away from the trauma. And while it's a part of who they are. There's a
Mm-hmm.
section where MJ admires Oren for his strength and not dragging baggage with him. And he goes, I don't carry baggage. Kind of what happened. They let that go. And he's kind of living in the moment and looking forward to what happens next. So I think while they probably bonded over trauma and being the only ones, right? Like they talk about people say they go with boys, but there are no other boys to go with. So I think that's how it starts out. But once they move to the big city and they start experiencing the world, they then realize that what they have is special and it's not
Mm.
just simply born out of the fact that they both came up out of this really horrible place and everybody kind of was against them.
Yeah. I really love how you've written your characters. They're very complex, and that's why it brings out a lot of like gray area questions for me. I'm like, oh, why did they do that? And like, so I have a lot of questions about that. But I do want to talk about another interesting character, Reverend Jack. Um,
Mm.
like there's a lot of like theology, I guess like religion trauma there. Um, so Reverend Jack, he has like a fundamentalist theology, and like it continues to influence Jackson even decades after leaving. And that kind of manifests a moral dilemma in Jackson that prioritized fatherhood and the perceived duty over his true love. So what I'm trying to ask is, how did Reverend Jack influence Jackson?
Hmm. That's a great question and one that no one's asked so far. And I think Reverend Jack is really kind of critical. And so, if you read my books, the through line through them all is that I'm just anti-organized religion, right? I just think it's a really terrible thing. It's really done some terrible things to our people, right? Even people who don't fall into my category, like you've got the
Yeah,
Middle Ages, where religion is just terrible to me, right? So
yeah.
that's kind of my through line. It really crystallizes here with Reverend Jackson and how, even though Jackson has rejected things, there's so much embedded in him from those early days
Hmm.
that he's always a preacher's kid, right? And that's what brings about the end. But one of the things I want to point out here is the book really is about patterns of behavior, right? So what is orientation? Orientation is a pattern of attraction, right? So
Hmm.
if you're always attracted to the guys and you're a guy, you're gay. So that's kind of that. But what I really wanted to look at was what happens when that pattern is broken, right? So Jackson, who's always been gay, right, breaks the pattern. But really, what that is really about, and I think most people miss that, but the affair he has, right, that
Hmm.
sin of infidelity is actually metaphorical, right? So the betrayal isn't of Oren, it's really Jackson betraying himself, right? So because
Hmm.
of the sudden pressure from his father and his mother when his father dies, and well, they said it's his fault and he should have changed, and kind of everybody saying that to him, you could have given the straight life a try, right? He then feels the pressure to betray himself and the fact that he's gay and he's always been attracted to men, right? And he goes off and gets her pregnant, right? So that's kind of where that is not quite clear, right?
Hmm.
And then the son he has, right, as he grows, it's showing how Jackson and Oren separated are growing themselves, right? Because they always talk about being this two trees that had grown together and they were suddenly split apart. For me, one of the
Hmm.
key scenes was when he runs into Jackson and Jackson is wearing new clothes. And he realizes the first time he's ever seen Jackson in clothes that Jackson bought himself, right? So that's kind of where it gets kind of iffy. But yeah, it's really that trauma that came back and him beginning to me back at the bus. There was a video years ago, it was a song, and it was about a snake handling preacher. And I can't remember the name of the song who sang it, but Martin Sheen was a snake handling preacher. And he's handling a snake in the service, and the snake bites him. And the line to the song goes, "In a moment of doubt, the venom proves stronger than daddy's faith." Right. So that is what informed kind of that affair, right? In a moment of doubt where Jackson is questioning the life he's built with Rio, like everything falls apart and the relationship dies because of that one moment of doubt.
I just needed a moment of silence after that. That's crazy. That's wow. I hope that explanation alone just encourages our readers to read your book. Um, But you talked about the divorce, so I guess I can talk about that too. Um, so following the divorce, Oren kind of finds a glimmering hope, a second chance with his original crush, Rio. So their relationship was intense, volatile, complicated because Rio insisted that he's straight and only gay for Oren. So given Oren's permanence, what emotional need was fulfilled by the romance with Rio?
I think for and Oren actually says this. If he was going to be with anybody other than Jackson, the only other person it could have been was Rio, right? And so the question is why? And I think to a certain extent because he had put so much of his energy into Jackson and building that life and that permanence
Mm,
and building a foundation, and then it all gets wiped away like there was a hurricane and blew the roof off his life, right?
mm,
And so for him, Rio was as far away from Jackson as possible, right? But then there's also that kind of thing that I think we all go through, that whole what if, right? And so it's kind of a second chance, right? Like, let's see where this goes. And like, he's never sure of where it's going to go, how permanent it is, but he kind of goes with it because it's Rio, right? And he was his
mm,
first crush. It's like, really, what does this look like? And by the way, Jackson is gone. So what else is there? He's not going to go out and meet somebody else at his age, right? So it just feels kind of right to him. And he kind of just turns a blind eye to the fact that Rio's kind of flaky and doesn't really do anything right. Or doesn't hang his clothes up and leaves the closet doors open, all of these kind of irritating things.
It's close to home. I think people
I
are
mean, we've
laughing,
all
right?
done that, right?
Yeah. 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 But I mean, thank God. I mean, Oren and Jackson reunited. Um, but yeah, I mean, having achieved the, laughter and love and a rather plotting domesticity that Oren craved. So Oren obviously said that their love didn't die, but merely went into hiding, just asleep but not dead, which I love the concept of. So what allows them to finally find their way back to each other, kind of overcoming Jackson's betrayal and Oren's just intense hurt? Valid, right?
Absolutely valid. And I think for them, it's because that love really never went away. Like when you think about
Mm,
it, the first thing he notices after breaking up and he runs into Jackson a few years later is Jackson is still wearing his wedding ring, right? And
yeah.
Jackson admits when he finally admits that it's because taking it off would be like letting go a piece of you. So Jackson never really let go of Oren. He just had to he created a child and he had to raise that child and be there for them, right? So while he sacrificed Oren, he never sacrificed the fact that he loved him. And I think again, it
Yeah.
speaks back to that thing where when they talk about because it was he, because it was I, that's what made them survive, right? Just
Mm,
knowing that they were each kind of made for each other and nothing could really like change that. Even if the
hmm.
situation changed, they were separated. They were never really separated like in their hearts and souls.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of one of the things they kind of went through hell. And it's like they went through a second hell, right? Their childhood was hell. They made it through, found each other. They go through the hell of that breakup and everything that happened. And then they find each other again, right? So it
Yeah.
kind of, for me, it talks to that idea that we as gay people have never had that story where our love was created in the stars, right? Or it was
Mm,
our destiny. And so for them, I wanted to really give that to them and kind of introduce that concept that we too can be destined for each other.
absolutely. Oh, that's beautiful. I kind of like tore up a little bit, just teary-eyed. Um, but I mean, wow. I really, really love the complexity of the characters, and I love how you bring them to life by the way you explain it. And I just love kind of like psychoanalyzing each character. Again, it's like not black and white, which is beautiful. But I did
No,
have
I
three
think one
more
of the
questions.
things
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. But one of the things that for me really spoke to their love for each other and they're willing to forgive each other was if you notice, Owen never asked Jackson why,
Hmm.
right? He just accepts this happened for whatever reason. And so that's again trusting that Jackson kind of had his feelings. I think for me too, what makes the book a little bit gray is that it's told all through Owen's point of view in his diary entries, right?
Uh-huh.
So really, when people do things, Oren has no idea of why they're doing it. And writing the book, there was really a temptation to write in the third person so you could kind of fill in those
Mm,
blanks. But then I thought, let's just experience this through Oren. And then
right.
readers are left to kind of interpret others' behavior, just like we're in real life. Somebody does something, you're like, why the hell would you do that? And you don't
Exactly.
often ask them, but you're still left in your head to try and interpret that behavior.
Exactly. Exactly. Um, but if you had like one line from Jackson's perspective, what would you be able to say like, would you be able to answer Oren's why? Or would you want to spoil it? Or do you want to just leave it?
I think Jackson would again explain a moment of doubt, right? He thought maybe
Mm,
his whole
yeah.
life had been wrong. Maybe his father was right. Maybe he should have tried harder to be straight. And then, of
Mm,
course, the only woman he knows is Kit. And
mm,
then Kit always had her eye on him. So, kind of what happened in that period where he came back and he just lost his father and essentially lost his mother as well. And then Oren is away on a business trip. And he's going through
mm,
all of this. There's Kit who's saying she's going to take care of him, right? And
mm.
so that's, I think, what happened.
It might be a stupid question, but why do you think Oren didn't ask why? Is it because he was afraid to get hurt, or is it because just he loved Jackson so much he just let it go?
I think it's because he loved Jackson so much and he trusts Jackson so much that he might have actually understood why he did it, right? He might have really
Yeah.
known Jackson well enough to know that with everything that had just happened, that that's kind of what drove it. I think for him, he didn't really necessarily understand that it wasn't an affair. It was that kind of one shot deal. And he didn't
Yeah.
find that out until the end. And by then, he's kind of already forgiven him. But I think it's about, because really, when you think about how much he loves Jackson, he brings Jackson with him and they create a life together. When they're getting divorced, he makes sure Jackson has enough money, even though Jackson doesn't want anything from him because he feels so bad. And that's just
Mm,
kind of the way they are with each other. You mentioned that at some point, how they take care of each other. Jackson makes his coffee even after they break up. He leaves him,
yeah.
he irons his clothes. He does all of these things, and that's just the way they loved each other, was caring for each other, no matter what happened.
Oh, ugh, that's beautiful. I wish I could just stay silent for like 5 minutes and process all that. Um, but I do have three more questions.
Mm-hmm.
And as you're familiar with, we do have a segment called like what would Larry do? Like what would insert your name do? And these are scenarios where I'm curious how you would personally handle it. May it be like in the context of your book, if you were in your book. So the first question is, Oren's friend MJ notes that what people call normal is usually just common, and being different is not the same as being deviant or abnormal. Now, in a world that constantly attempts to enforce conformity, what would you give as an advice? What would Larry Benjamin give as an advice to someone struggling to reconcile their authentic self with societal pressures or expectations?
So I think it's a very simple question, right? Society, perhaps your family, whatever, wants you to live your life a certain way, the way they want you to live it, right? So for me, the
Mm-hmm.
question has always been, who's living their life for you? The answer is no one. Well, then why should you live your life for someone else?
Yeah.
Right. And I think for me, when we talk about the fact that I never struggled with being gay, first of all, I was one of those kids it was fairly obvious from like 7 on, right? Um, and that's just who I was. But when you talk about it, and my mother and I sat down and talked about it, what she said to me, I just feel so bad because your life is going to be so people are going to treat you differently. It's like there are people who are going to treat me differently because I'm black. Do you
Mm,
suggest I hide in the house, go out with a paper
mm.
bag over my head? I mean, it is what it is. You just don't let it get you down. You make the most of it. So I think being black and gay really helped me with the gay piece because there's so much of you that you can't like. Would I really change being black? No. I mean, that's even saying such a thing would be appalling, right? So I'm not really interested in changing any facet of me to make you comfortable or happy.
Wow. Yeah. Wow.
I mean, for me, it
That
really is that simple.
I wish it was simple for everybody else, but I
I do
mean,
too, and I feel bad when
yeah.
people struggle. I'm like, It's not.
Yeah.
This is the answer. But everybody has their own journey. Everybody thinks differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I kind of forgot to touch on the character Kit, right? Because my next
Mm,
question is going to be about Kit. So the book kind of illustrates the difficulty of reconciling love with personal sacrifice. Like the question that I asked, like up to what point do you draw the boundary, right? For example, Jackson's choice to leave Oren to prevent Kit from having an abortion. So if you, Larry Benjamin, were faced with a situation that required a really, 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 really painful sacrifice, personal sacrifice, or kind of compromising your moral obligation, even if it meant destroying your happiness, how would you navigate through that? And how would you decide?
I think again, just having a strong moral compass, not being self-righteous, just having a strong moral compass, right? And I think that's kind of what informs my decision and sticking to that. And sometimes it's
Mm,
painful to make that
mm,
decision and stand up for yourself, right? And I think really I've seen that happen with this administration and people who were friends or family who really supported this administration and things they were doing, not just to gay people and trans people, but to immigrants and people who are struggling to make ends meet, right? And to
mm,
tell me you support this person and this is why. And you can say, I just ask you a question, how can you know someone like me and support someone like that? And when people say, well, blah, 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 and I'm like, okay, you know what? This is it. I cannot be in the life of someone who doesn't value me enough to think about my well being.
right.
So that's cost me friends and family. But you know what? Again, I can't be hypocritical and embrace you for embracing something that's against not just me, but so many other innocent people.
Exactly. And it's crazy how people still struggle with that. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, I really like the fact that you brought up self-righteousness. It's more about integrity than acting holier than thou.
Right.
Okay, last question. Let's go back to Rio and Oren. So Oren often contrasts himself with Rio, right? Like his need for stability, permanence, putting down his roots, and then Rio just wants to be a nomad. He's impulsive. So if you, Larry Benjamin, woke up tomorrow feeling dissatisfied with stability and you would want to lean into your inner nomad, chasing new experiences like Rio, would you trust that permanence? Would you trust your established belief that permanence is the ultimate form of beauty?
Yes, I would definitely trust like that because I know myself, right? My
Mm,
entire life is built around that, right? One of the things we talk about was like, especially with this administration came, we should just move to like Italy or Spain or somewhere, right? But then we've got a house I love, like we've got some really close friends, like my nephews are growing up, right? It's like I'm not going to go chase a dream and leave all of that behind because ultimately it comes down
mm,
to it. That's my foundation. Those are my roots, right?
mm,
Trying to tear my roots and move somewhere else is not something I can do. And I
mm,
think we get restless sometimes, right? And we dream about doing something else. But then you really think about, do I really want to blow up my life for kind of this momentary whatever it is? So I always
right.
wonder about people who have midlife crises and they just blow their life apart. Like, what the hell? And then what? And maybe I'm just a dull person. I don't know, but I kind of love that stability, kind of knowing like I guess one of the things I love most about Stanley and our life together is there's no drama.
Mm.
Like my 20s was full of drama and lunatics, right? I'm like so over it.
You've lived it, but Larry, you're not a dull person. I mean, we both know you're not
Thank
a
you.
dull person. Let's let's establish that. But before I let you go, where can our viewers find your books or find you?
The easiest way to find me and my books is just to visit my website, authorlarrybenjamin.com. It has links to
Mhm.
all of my social, all of my videos, all of my books are out there. And there's also a form you can actually just email me, ask me questions, share your thoughts on the book. I'm always happy to engage with readers. And I really love hearing from readers and kind of understanding their experience with the book because writing is so solitary. You just put it out there, and
Yeah.
you never know kind of what people are getting out of it. So one reason why I love speaking to you is because you read the book, and it's kind of interesting to see hear your questions and kind of see your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I'll definitely like probably email you some more questions, not gonna lie. But Larry, thank you so much for this experience. Thank you so much for spending your time again with us and sharing your wisdom. I definitely learned a lot about love. It's definitely not black and white, much like life itself. Um,
Right.
so thank you so much. And to our viewers, we'll link Larry's socials and his website below in the description. And I really hope that you get to read his book, as you can see, it's just very complex, yet very refreshing and healing. It takes you on a journey, very human, I would say. So thank you again so much, Larry. This
Yeah.
has been
Thank you
your
for having me
host.
again and for reading the book, especially.
Yeah. Hopefully, I'll have you back on again. But to our viewers, thank you so much also for listening in. For more conversations like these with authors, subscribe to our channel, comment below, show Larry some love, tell us your thoughts. And until then, this has been your host, Monica, for Apex Media Global's Author Spotlight.